Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Squared Up Coffee Break webinar. My name is Matthew Long, and today we're going to be looking at a community resource, which is a free SQL Query Management Pack. So those of you who are regulars may know that normally I have a partner in crime here to go through the coffee break with me. This week, all of my sort of usual suspects are off at our US customer workshop or busy beavering away on our next upcoming release. So today I'll be flying solo. Not to worry though, I have plenty of good content to show you. So this week what we're looking at, we'll dive straight in, is a free management pack created by a lovely chap called Zvi Uretzky. And what it does essentially is it lets you take any arbitrary SQL query that you might use to test the health of your application, drop that straight into the SCOM authoring tab without any MP authoring required, and then immediately turn that into a monitor and performance collection rule in SCOM. Now, the cool thing about this is what it lets you do is start actually monitoring your application, not the infrastructure of that app, without having to know all the MP authoring required to actually leverage that and put it into SCOM. So it's really great when your admins come to you and say, hey, I want to monitor this part of my app. I've got this query that does it. Can you put it into SCOM? And normally before you had to say, yes, but give me a week to go and figure out how to do that. Now it's really, really easy. In fact, you could push this out to them, push this back to them if you actually trust everyone in your org to have some SCOM authoring rights. So enough sort of preamble, let's dive right into it. So for those of you who've seen our PowerShell monitoring management pack, effectively it's exactly the same kind of principle. You import this MP. It doesn't actually light up any additional monitoring environment directly. What it does is it puts in new tabs under the in the authoring pane of the SCOM console that lets you create SQL query monitors. So that's from any arbitrary SQL query that you currently have today or that you could put together. And then you can monitor the application data rather than just the health of the SQL infrastructure it's on and alert when it's over a threshold. So the classic example is, let's say you've got an e-commerce app, okay? And you know that if at Monday morning there are 0 customers logged into the database and there are 0 transactions going on, that clearly means there's an issue somewhere, okay? As a smoke test, that's a great way of knowing people should be online and purchasing stuff, or people should be processing orders, or people should be doing whatever. And this is a great sort of way of getting that outside-in monitoring and being able to tell, is someone actually using the app in the way that we expect them to? Or conversely, is someone using the app in a way that they really shouldn't be using it? We've got loads of like dead stuck jobs or something like that. This is clearly an issue down the line somewhere else, and we need to go and take a look at that. Now we can take a query that tests that, drop that in, and as long as the result that comes back is a numeric value, so like the number of open orders as an example, we can then collect that in SCOM, put that in a data warehouse, you do all your typical trending and reporting across that, and likewise we can test health against that as well. So we can say, over the last 5 samples, what's that sort of number of transactions value been? If it's been over a certain threshold, let's go and light up an alert for that. So it's really, really powerful stuff. And as if you sit down with your app teams, especially if it's got a SQL backend and the guys have been owning it for a long time, they will know the kinds of queries. They've probably already got some that they run anyway to test whether everything looks good, and enabling those to go straight into SCOM and be run automatically is really, really cool. Okay, so I'm actually going to show you a demo of this now, but unfortunately this requires me to use the SCOM console. So everyone pray for me. Hopefully my demo won't explode halfway through. So just also to to sidestep any sort of questions, I've put the query I'm going to use right there on the slide. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a monitor with a perf collection backed by it to monitor the inbound connections to my apps database. So let's say this app, this is our sales app. You've seen this probably quite a few times in the Squared Up demos that we do. It's got 2 SQL servers on the back end, and it's got a bunch of app servers in the middle that are taking orders from the web front end, processing those, and then inserting them into the database and manipulating records and doing things with that. We've had some issues with connectivity onto that, and although like we've got the service being monitored, if let's say during patching someone puts the wrong connection string in or changes a SQL setting or changes an app setting, that can actually break that connection, where even though the SQL database is up and even though the service is running, it can't actually connect and talk to the SQL database properly. And typically those events get sort of buried somewhere else in a different view, maybe in the SQL team's silo, where they can see like events coming up saying that failed logons or something like that, or maybe they're being put into an event query somewhere. But this is actually a great way of us being able to correlate this directly to this app and say, we would expect to see this many number of inbound connections from these hosts. We're not seeing that. There's some kind of issue here somewhere, perhaps in configuration, perhaps in availability, maybe it's a networking issue or a load balance or whatever. But it's a great smoke test that lets you know whether your application is performing correctly based on its behavior, not based on like its infrastructure health. So that's the query. It's basically a simple select count query that's going to look at the number of inbound TCP connections to a certain database. So my database here is called OPP. Obviously, if you wanted to use this, you just put whatever your database name would be there. And then that number gets returned back as an integer value that we can then use in the monitor. So first things first, as with all sort of things like this is my SQL Management Studio. I'm just going to test my query to make sure it actually works. Do that outside SCOM. This will then save you loads of problems. If there's a bug in your query, you don't have to go back and forth between SCOM and this over and over, put it in, wait 5 minutes for the monitor to run. Okay, it still didn't work, didn't give me the value. Is it the monitoring setup that's broken or is it the query? This is just a nice way of sidestepping that and saying, look, there is my query at the bottom. It's returning the correct value. There's the number of connections currently, and so I know that looks good. I'm all happy with that. If you wanted to use this, by the way, for a query that didn't necessarily normally return a numeric value, so let's say I want to alert if a certain row has a text string appearing in it, well then you can just change your query to say only return rows that match that query and then just count the number of rows. So okay, there's these 5 rows that have this error message in, and you can always then just bake the error message or whatever into your alert description if you need to. So at least then you're still able to query and monitor for that. But typically with this sort of use case especially, you're monitoring some kind of performance value, some sort of individual metric on the number of something. So this is a pretty easy way to do that. Okay, so I have my query. I'm just going to copy that and do Control-C. That's the prerequisites. I have a SQL query. What I'm going to do now is go over to the SCOM console. So what I've done is I've imported Zvi's management pack into SCOM. I won't bore you showing how to do that, but it went to admin, import management pack. I downloaded that from his GitHub, and there's a link on the next slide, but there's also a link at the start of the webinar as well, so you can go back and view that if you're watching on YouTube and just note that down. You run the MSI, you import the thing, done. No messing around with changing your agents. You don't have to go and provision anything anywhere. It's just a management pack you import. And like I said, what it does is it will light up a new management pack template here called OLEDB Query Monitoring. You'll already have one called OLEDB Data Source. The difference is the data source one is one that's shipped with SCOM out of the box. But all that does is run a SQL query and tell you whether that query worked or not. So it's great for saying I can connect to this database and run a query, but it doesn't actually tell you whether the results of that query were, as it were, good or not. So it's not very good for monitoring application behavior. It's great for monitoring application infrastructure and telling you, yes, I can connect to that DB, but not actually if there's anything there on the other side. It could be an empty database, but that would still work and connect okay. So this is much, much more powerful. And I know Richard Benwell said this when he covered it mentioned it briefly on a previous coffee break, but this is something that SCOM probably should have had from the beginning. So it's great that we finally have this capability now. So what I can do is right click and say add monitoring wizard. And in the dialog that pops up, hopefully it's on the screen, there we go. I can say OLEDB query monitoring, I hit next. It'll ask for a name for this particular one. So I'm going to call this the sales app inbound connections. Today there's a limitation with this where you have to do this once for each database you want to connect to. So in this case, I've got 2 DBs, so I have to do it twice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the server name in there that I'm running this against, just so I can differentiate the two apart. There is, however, for doing roll-up on this, there is a nice little option at the end of this wizard, so I'll highlight that for you in a second, for those of you who might want to be running the query against multiple servers and then aggregating the result. As always, the SCOM, I have to pick a management pack to pop it into. So there's my order processing platform management pack. Hit next. And it's going to ask me now to say, you need a database to run this against. So I'll hit browse, and brilliantly what Zvi's done is enabled lookup for all the databases already in SCOM. So I can go and say, right, this is for SQL 03, and the database I want to run this against. My query runs against master because I'm querying system tables to see inbound connections to SQL. Obviously, if you're running this against your app's database, you'd pick the database name in question. So that, and then I'm going to pick Microsoft OLEDB provider for SQL Server. What this MP is actually doing is it's just highlighting or surfacing behavior that's actually already in SCOM. So SCOM can actually already query a database arbitrarily from any agent. It's just that Microsoft never gave you a wizard for doing that, and that's what Zvi's created here. So just pick Microsoft OLEDB provider for SQL Server. For those of you who advanced, if you did want to use one of the other drivers, you can do so, but then it's up to you to make sure that those are all available on your agents and that kind of thing. So the OLEDB provider works with any SQL query. That's a good one to go for. You need to pick whether you want to run as Windows Auth or SQL Auth. If you pick Windows Auth, you're done for configuring this stuff. If you pick SQL Auth, then you'll need to go and pick which run as account you want to use credentials from. And if you do that, it even populates it. So again, makes it very easy to do all that. So I'll say Windows Auth. And then the final part, I have to write my query. So I'm just going to paste that in here. You could write the query directly in here, but you don't get syntax highlighting. That's an artifact of me copying and pasting. So I would suggest write the query and test it in SQL Management Studio and then drop it in here afterwards. And the last thing you need to do is if you need to give a name to that counter, and that's what will get used for performance collection for this particular value. So if you're monitoring, say, the number of orders in the database, ideally you want to be able to graph that as well, and this name is what will get given to the counter. So in this case, I want to call this something like inbound connections or number of orders or whatever you want to call it, but that's the counter name. Now there's a test button over here. I should point out it does work, but it functions the same way that the SCOM OLEDB data source or the web transaction monitoring test buttons work, which is that it doesn't actually test it from your management servers or from your agents. It tests it from this console using your permissions. So that test button's probably going to fail if, like, for example, here, my account doesn't have access to this database. SCOM does, but I don't, so that button wouldn't work. So do bear that in mind before you hit the test button and it fails. It doesn't necessarily mean it'll actually fail in SCOM. Okay, if I go to next. Now what it's going to ask me to do is, for the health of this, how do I actually tell when it's unhealthy or not? So the monitoring's hooked up behind a consecutive sampler. And what that means is that rather than just doing it on the first value, you can say to it, across the 3 or 4 or 5 queries, only actually alert if it is broken or this value is bad across, say, 3 samples or 4 samples. So here I can say, for example, that I know, based on the number of app servers, that I need to have at least 6 connections. So I'm going to say that if there are less than 6 connections, then I want to mark that sample as being bad. And if I have that happen 2 consecutive times, an alert should be generated. So it's basically, remember, it's the way it works is if this top value is true, then that's a bad sample. And then after the consecutive number of bad samples, raise an alert. So here I can now also go and put some extra details. This is the alert description. So I can say here something like insufficient inbound connections, investigate SQL config and app availability, something like that. Obviously, you can put more detail in here normally. Now, the last thing it asks you to do on this wizard pane is to select a group. Now, this is where it's actually going to do some aggregation, and this is quite a clever bit that Zvi has created here. Basically, what you can have it do is for each of these templates you configure, let's say, as I do in this example, I've got 2 SQL servers, each the database that's being load balanced. I want this monitoring applied to both. I want to aggregate that roll up so I can say, look, as long as one of the 2 is healthy, that's fine because it's being load balanced. What I can do is I can create a group. I can click the create a new group option. And then what it will do is it will create a new sort of top level container for that. Both those objects go underneath it. And then I can then do health rollup and monitoring on that top level object rather than each database independently. So it's a great way of sort of aggregating the results across multiple different servers. This picker, I should point out, works only against groups created by this monitoring wizard. So the first time you run this, you will have to create a new group. It's not actually a SCOM group in the sense of you don't have to go and manage it, but it will contain all the tests that you've created here, and then you can select them again in the future. So if I was doing this on my 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th server, I would just hit select existing group, click browse, and it already shows up in here, and I could then pick that again and say, okay, well, actually, this is going into my part of my particular query for inbound connections. Let's call that now inbound connections. So this isn't a group I can manage. This isn't a group that says where I run it from. This is just a group that says, okay, aggregate what's going on here under a top level object. So sales app inbound connections. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. If not, just create a group, call it SQL Query DB if you don't need to do any aggregation, and you can put them all in the same group. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change the way they behave. It's just for sort of a roll-up purpose. Okay, once that's done, I can hit next. And you can tell that Zvi knows what he's doing in terms of SCOM and actually knows what business use case tends to be, because you'll notice he hasn't just given you a scheduler for run every 5 minutes. He's actually attached timers to it as well. So you can say, Windows. So you can say, actually only monitor this during certain business hours. So again, going back to my scenario, if you know that order processing is only available 9 till 5, well, you want to monitor it 9 till 5. If it's 5:05 when everyone goes home, there's no orders anymore, that's fine. You don't care about that. So I can say here, okay, make this only from 9 till 5, or in my case, I want to do this 24/7. So I can say 23:59. So it'll run from midnight all the way through the day. Likewise, I can change the interval here to whatever value I like. 5 minutes is fine. And it also has a synchronizer as well. So I can say run this 1 minute past the hour or 10 minutes past the hour or whatever if I want to synchronize that to certain times. And you can even pick which days of the week it runs. So let's say don't run it on Sunday and Saturday. So this is actually really, really flexible, makes it very easy to run business queries where typically they tend to follow certain hours. Or if you've got like planned maintenance windows for the app where it's always down at 2 in the morning, that's for 2 till 3, that's when we do our maintenance. Well, again, you can just turn it off so it doesn't run at that point. Okay. Final screen, if I hit create now, it'll go away and create that monitoring in that management pack. I'm not going to hit the create button because if I did that, the SCOM console would churn for a few minutes. So to save you time, I'm going to hit cancel and go and show you one I created earlier. So you can see I've done this twice, once for SQL 3 and once for SQL 4. If I now jump over to the monitoring pane and go to query monitor, you'll have a state view here, which shows you there's the two checks running and you can see all the properties that I've configured previously. And if I go to group state, there's the top level group that rolls them all up together, called whatever I wanted to call it arbitrarily. And if I go to the performance tab, there you go. There's the sort of performance collection that's been going on for the past hour or two. So that's now a really easy way of me running those queries, seeing, okay, are those queries succeeding? And in the case of like tracking like number of orders or performance counter based on, aggregations of the last few runs or whatever else, now I can see that straight away. Obviously, you guys are hopefully all squared up customers. So I thought I'd show you a dashboard here as well where you can see the same results of my labor. So I have a status tile here, status block tile showing for each database, each database connection, its current health. You can see that metrics being shown here on the graph, and you can even see the alerts showing up there. One of the final things I want to mention on this management pack, it's not something that we necessarily expose in Squared Up today, but it does actually work, is that this management pack supports what's called on-demand detection. What that means is, if I go to the Health Explorer for this, and hang on, I was on the wrong window. Here we go. And I go to the monitor. You see the recalculate health button up here? It actually works. So if I do recalculate health, this should, depending on what's happening with our sales app at the moment, that should go healthy. No, okay. Oh, there you go. So actually that recalculate health button actually works for this monitor, which is brilliant. No more resetting it and waiting to see if it comes back healthy or not. You can actually now hit recalculate and immediately see, yep, we're in a good scenario again. Or, okay, no, it's still broken. I need to go and do some work on this. So that's pretty cool. And again, shows that Zvi is kind of really in tune with what people actually, how people actually use SCOM, like he's enabled that functionality. So hopefully you guys are looking at it and thinking, hey, this is actually pretty cool. So let me jump back to slides and just show you where you can get this and talk a little bit about sort of providing feedback for this sort of stuff. Okay, so the MP is free and it is open source and there's no dependency in Squared Up at all. It is just a SCOM management pack. So you can get it from GitHub. There's an MSI installer for it there. If you go to the releases tab on GitHub on that page, you'll be able to download and install that. It's on version 2 at the moment. And it looks like Zvi is taking feedback as well and updating that as he gets people logging issues. So it's definitely alive and kicking. So if you like this MP and you found it useful, do go and let him know. When you create stuff and open source it and put it up there, it's actually a lot of effort often to get permission from your boss to be able to share something that potentially you've used at work, and then go and wrap it up so it's consumable by other people and put it out there. So it's really, really nice to hear feedback and people say, yep, this was definitely exactly what I needed as well, and it's really helped me out. So if you like this MP and you think it's good, definitely go and give it some praise and let him know. If you've had some problems, don't just go, well, fine, whatever, and throw the management pack away. Go onto GitHub and log an issue. Or if you have a suggestion about how to improve the management pack, likewise, go and do that. People are often very happy to take feedback and suggestions, and your idea might be something they've never thought of. But they go, oh, actually, yeah, that'd be really cool for me too. And then they go and incorporate that into the MP. So, be part of that community. Don't just sort of look at this and go, oh, well, it doesn't work. Never mind. I'll sort of go back to sort of making do without. It's worth actually logging that issue and sort of having that conversation. Likewise, even better, if you have the skills to contribute and maybe do some MP authoring yourself here. Ask the author if they'd be willing to accept a PR to fix or improve the issue, and then actually do the work yourself. These things are often labours of love that are done outside of sort of working hours. So if someone's offered to lend a hand, often that's really great to hear, rather than just someone complaining about something. So if you have the skills, please contribute. And you know what, if the author says actually that's not really in the use case of this, that's fine. You can always fork the management pack on GitHub and then go and make the changes either privately or publicly. That's up to you. But definitely at least ask if you can contribute back, because then you can make things better for everyone, and so we can all benefit from everyone's sort of pooled wisdom and skill set. And finally, please do be respectful, because often people have put a lot of their own personal time into this. They are trying to support you with your problem. If the management pack, if it doesn't work, out of the goodness of their heart, in their own time. So having someone sort of screaming and saying, "This thing's terrible, I can't believe you wrote it this way, why can't you make it work now? You haven't responded in the last 48 hours. What's going on here?" You didn't pay for this. This is a free thing that someone has spent a lot of their time doing. So do be sort of respectful when you're sort of providing feedback. Try to be positive about things. If you have a negative experience with the management pack, suggest feedback and be helpful, rather than just sort of rather than being like you can be on the internet sometimes. Okay, so hopefully this has been something that you guys have found useful. Like I said, it's definitely worth checking this out. We did a coffee break a few weeks ago, or quite a few weeks ago now, on some things we found at Experts Live that were pretty cool, some other community resources as well. So if you thought this was a useful sort of look at something that's available to you guys, then let us know, and we'll cover off a few more of these, like maybe the security monitoring management pack that we mentioned on a couple of coffee breaks now, and we'll sort of deep dive into those. Likewise, if you do use this management pack and you come up with some cool examples or cool dashboards, let Zvi know, and definitely let us know as well, because we'd love to showcase that if you find a really good example of how this management pack could be leveraged. Okay, so with that, I'm going to wrap up the coffee break. So this is your first time. If you haven't yet done the squaredup.com coffee breaks topics survey, please do so. We really value feedback here at SquaredUp, and it'd be great to know if you have a topic that has been bugging you for a while now and you'd really like us to cover it. Do go there and let us know. There's a free text field at the end, so you can suggest any topic, as well as upvoting ones that we reckon that you guys would be interested in. If you want to see what's coming up next, or maybe sign up a colleague or friend to this webinar series, you can do so on the Coffee Break microsite, where there's a little agenda list and a form you can fill out, and then you get subscribed to the webinar. The recordings and slides are published via our blog, so you can go there and check those out. Typically, they're up 24 hours after we do the live recording, so they should be up Wednesday typically. And that will obviously include this time the query I just used there. So if you want to use that query yourself for this or any other purpose, it's in there. You'll be able to grab it from that and drop it straight into your management pack. And also there's a YouTube playlist as well along with this and the previous 28 episodes we've done that covers a wealth of topics around SquaredUp and SCOM and enterprise monitoring. So it's definitely worth checking out if this is your first time coming across SquaredUp, or you're new to SquaredUp, maybe from you're someone who saw the product Ignite and started following along. Go and look at that, because there's a load of really good introductory and deep dive content available there. Now, as always, myself, along with the technical team here at SquaredUp, are online for answering questions. So if you have a question about the management pack or just SCOM or SquaredUp in general, feel free to ask that question in the chat, and we'll try and answer it as best we can. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us. I hope this webinar was useful, and thank you for your time. See you next week.